The morning sun cast long shadows across the dried riverbed, where vultures circled overhead like harbingers of death. In the distance, the sound of cracking bones echoed through the silence, not from prey, but from the shattered skulls of those who dared to drink from forbidden waters. Blood had soaked into the cracked earth days ago, yet the metallic scent still lingered in the air, mixing with the putrid smell of rotting flesh. Something moved in the tall grass. Eyes gleamed with primal hunger. The waterhole that once brought life to countless creatures had become a graveyard. And somewhere in the shadows, she watched ... waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The female Homo habilis known as Kira had learned that in this world, only the ruthless survive. But what she was about to witness would change everything she thought she knew about survival. The acacia trees stood like skeletal fingers against the blood-orange sky, their thorns glistening with morning dew that would soon evaporate under the merciless African sun. Kira, a female Homo habilis with scars mapping her weathered skin like ancient stories, crouched behind a cluster of rocks, her dark eyes fixed on the waterhole below. Her tribe had been without water for 3 days. 3 endless days of watching the weak grow weaker, of listening to the children's whimpers fade into silence. The elderly had already begun their final journey, their bodies too frail to continue the desperate search for life-giving moisture. But here it was crystal clear water, reflecting the early light like liquid diamonds. The problem wasn't finding it. The problem was the other tribe that had claimed it first. Kira's calloused fingers tightened around her stone-tipped spear as she counted them. 12 adults, maybe more hidden in the surrounding brush. Their camp was strategically positioned on higher ground, giving them a clear view of anyone approaching. Smoke rose from their fire pit, carrying the tantalizing aroma of roasted meat gazelle by the smell of it. "They feast while we starve," whispered Brock, Kira's hunting partner, as he slithered up beside her. His ribs showed through his dark skin, testament to their tribe's desperate situation. The rival tribe below moved with the confidence of those who controlled precious resources. Their leader, a massive male with arms like tree trunks, stood guard at the water's edge. Even from this distance, Kira could see the fresh blood staining his hands, whether from yesterday's hunt or yesterday's battle. She couldn't tell. A child from Kira's tribe began to cry somewhere behind them, the sound sharp and piercing in the morning air. Several heads from the rival camp turned toward their hiding spot. "We've been spotted," Brock hissed. Kira's heart hammered against her chest. The morning breeze carried the scent of danger, the musky smell of unwashed bodies, the metallic tang of blood, and something else ... fear. Her own fear. The massive leader below raised his spear and let out a bone-chilling war cry that echoed across the savannah. It was answered immediately by similar cries from hidden positions all around them. They were surrounded. Kira's eyes darted across the landscape, searching for an escape route. To their left, a wall of thorny bushes. To their right, open ground that would leave them exposed. Behind them, the rest of her starving tribe, 20 souls, depending on her to make the right choice. The leader below began advancing up the slope, his tribe flanking him on both sides. Each step brought them closer to a confrontation that would determine who lived and who became food for the scavengers. "What do we do?" Brack's voice cracked with desperation. Kira touched the bone pendant hanging from her neck, a fragment from her mother's skull, worn smooth by years of handling. Her mother had died defending their water rights during the Great Drought 15 seasons ago. The memory of her mother's final screams echoed in her mind. But there was something else in that memory, something her mother had whispered with her dying breath. Sometimes the hunter must become the hunted. As the rival tribe closed in, Kira made a decision that would either save her people or damn them all. The confrontation erupted with the sudden violence of a thunderstorm. Kira burst from behind the rocks, her war cry piercing the morning air as she charged directly at the rival tribe's leader. The move was so unexpected, so seemingly suicidal that it caught everyone off guard. But this wasn't suicide. This was strategy. As the massive leader raised his spear to strike her down, Kira dove to the side and rolled beneath his swing. Her own spear found flesh, not his, the one of his lieutenants who had moved to flank her. The stone tip punctured his thigh, sending him crashing to the ground in a spray of blood. The distraction was exactly what her tribe needed. Brock led the charge from their hidden position, his desperate hunger transforming into savage fury. The two tribes collided in a chaos of screams, grunts, and the wet sound of stone meeting flesh. The morning air filled with the copper scent of spilled blood and the acrid smell of disturbed earth. Kira rolled away from the fallen warrior and found herself face to face with a female from the rival tribe, younger, stronger, with murder gleaming in her coal-black eyes. They circled each other like predators, their breath creating small clouds in the cool air. "You die slow," the rival female snarled, her words barely recognizable through her rage. The attack came fast and brutal. The younger female lunged with her obsidian blade, aiming for Kira's throat. But desperation had honed Kira's reflexes to razor sharpness. She twisted away, feeling the blade whistle past her ear so close it cut away strands of her matted hair. Using her opponent's momentum against her, Kira grabbed the younger female's wrist and pulled her forward while driving her knee upward. The impact connected with a sickening crunch as ribs cracked. Her opponent doubled over, gasping. Around them, the battle raged with primal intensity. She could hear Brack's roar of pain. Had he been struck? A child's terrified scream cut through the chaos. Not one of theirs, she realized with grim satisfaction. The younger female wasn't finished. Despite her broken ribs, she swung wildly with her blade, catching Kira across the forearm. Fire raced up Kira's arm as blood began to flow, staining her already dirt-caked skin. But pain was an old friend to Kira. She had learned to dance with it during countless hunts, countless battles for survival. The wound only sharpened her focus. The rival tribe's leader had finally shaken off his confusion and was now cutting through her people like a man possessed. His stone axe rose and fell in devastating arcs, each strike finding its mark. Two of her tribe already lay motionless at his feet. Kira knew she had to end her own fight quickly or watch her people be slaughtered. The younger female lunged again, this time aiming low for Kira's belly. But instead of dodging backward, Kira stepped into the attack, accepting the blade's kiss along her ribs in exchange for getting inside her opponent's guard. Her stone knife found the younger female's throat. Blood bubbled from the wound as the rival warrior's eyes widened in shock. She tried to speak, but only crimson foam emerged from her lips. She toppled backward, her life flowing out onto the thirsty earth. But victory in personal combat meant nothing if her tribe was being destroyed around her. The massive leader had just brought down another of her warriors when his eyes locked with hers across the battlefield. In them, she saw something that chilled her more than the morning wind recognition. He knew who she was. He had been there 15 seasons ago when her mother died. And now he was smiling. The smile on the rival leader's face was like looking into the maw of a hyena, all teeth and malevolent hunger. He stepped over the bodies of Kira's fallen tribesmen as if they were nothing more than stones in his path. "Little Kira," his voice rumbled like distant thunder, "you grew up pretty, just like your mother." The words hit her harder than any physical blow. This beast had not only killed her mother, he remembered it fondly. Around them, the battle had become a massacre. The rival tribe outnumbered them, outmuscled them, and held the tactical advantage of higher ground. Half of her people already lay bleeding into the red earth, their dreams of water dying with them. But Kira's rage was a living thing now, feeding on her desperation and growing stronger with each heartbeat. "You remember her screams?" The leader taunted, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around him. "She begged for mercy, begged me to spare her worthless child." Kira's vision began to narrow, the edges tinged with red. She could hear her mother's voice in her memory, not the screams this monster wanted her to remember, but the whispered wisdom shared during quiet moments around their own fire. Rage is a tool, little one. But like fire, it can consume the one who wields it or light the path to victory. The leader raised his stone axe, its blade stained with the blood of her people. But as he brought it down in a devastating arc, Kira wasn't where he expected her to be. She had learned from watching the great cats hunt. Sometimes the best defense was to become smaller, harder to hit. She dropped into a crouch and rolled between his legs, a knife finding the soft flesh behind his knee as she passed. His roar of pain and surprise shook the morning air. The giant stumbled but didn't fall. His legs were like tree trunks, and it would take more than one cut to bring him down. But now he was bleeding, and blood was a language that every predator on the savannah understood. Kira came up behind him, her blade seeking the tendons in his other leg. But he spun faster than she anticipated for such a massive creature. His backhanded blow caught her across the face, sending her sprawling. Stars exploded across her vision. The taste of blood filled her mouth, her own this time. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear the death cries of more of her people. They were losing, badly. The leader stood over her, axe raised for the killing blow. Your mother's screams were music. Yours will be even sweeter. But as the axe began its descent, Kira heard something that changed everything. The distinctive whistle of her tribe's hunting call. Not the call for attack or retreat, but something else entirely. The call for fire. Brack's voice rose above the chaos. The grass is dry. Drive them toward the flames. Somewhere behind the rival tribe's position, smoke began to rise. Not the controlled smoke of a cooking fire, but the wild, hungry smoke of a grass fire catching and spreading. The rival leader's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The wind was blowing toward their waterhole, toward their camp, toward everything they had fought to protect. In his moment of distraction, Kira struck. Her blade found the artery in his thigh, not a killing blow, but enough to send his life's blood pouring out in rhythmic spurts. He stumbled backward, finally understanding that he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. The smoke was thicker now, and she could hear the crackle of flames consuming the dry grass. The rival tribe was beginning to panic as their escape route back to higher ground was being cut off by the spreading fire. But something was wrong. The flames were moving too fast, consuming everything in their path with a hunger that seemed almost alive. And the wind was changing direction. The fire had become a living monster, devouring everything in its path with insatiable hunger. What had begun as a tactical maneuver was rapidly becoming a death sentence for both tribes. Thick, black smoke rolled across the battlefield like a suffocating blanket. The acrid smell burned Kira's nostrils and throat, making each breath a struggle. Around her, warriors from both sides stumbled blindly through the haze, their tribal loyalties forgotten in the face of this greater threat. The wounded rival leader crawled toward the waterhole, leaving a trail of blood behind him like a crimson breadcrumb path. His massive frame was racked with coughing fits as the smoke filled his lungs. Even dying, he was more concerned with reaching water than escaping the flames. Kira understood why. The fire had cut off most escape routes, and the waterhole offered the only sanctuary large enough for both tribes if they could share it. But cooperation was not a concept that existed in their world. A figure emerged from the smoke, one of her own people. A young male named Tor, whose left arm hung useless at his side, bone protruding through torn flesh. "Kira," he gasped. "The fire circles us. We're trapped." The flames had indeed formed a rough circle, pushed by shifting winds that seemed to delight in their predicament. The fire moved with terrifying speed across the sun-dried grass, leaving only blackened earth and the charred skeletons of trees in its wake. Through the smoke, she could see members of the rival tribe, facing the same horrifying realization. Their superior numbers meant nothing against an enemy that consumed flesh as readily as grass. A child's scream pierced through the crackling flames, not a battle cry or pain, but pure terror. One of the rival tribe's young ones had been separated from the group and was trapped between two walls of advancing fire. Every instinct Kira had developed over her harsh life told her to let the child burn. This was natural selection at its most brutal. The weak died so the strong could survive. The rival tribe had shown her people no mercy. But as she watched the small figure stumbling through the smoke, she heard her mother's voice again, not from memory this time, but as clear as if she stood beside her. "We are not animals, little one. We choose who we become." Kira plunged into the smoke wall. The heat hit her like a physical blow. The air itself seemed to be burning, searing her lungs with each desperate breath. She followed the sound of crying, stumbling over unseen obstacles as visibility dropped to mere arm's length. Her foot caught on something soft to body. She knelt and felt along its length, recognizing the rival leader by his massive frame. He was still breathing, barely, his eyes wide with the kind of fear that only comes when death stands at your shoulder. "Please," he whispered, the word barely audible through his damaged throat. The child's cries were closer now, somewhere to her left. Kira could save one or the other, the helpless child or the monster who had destroyed her mother. The flames wouldn't wait for her to save both. She looked down at the dying leader, seeing in his eyes the same terror she had felt as a child watching her mother die. The same helplessness, the same desperate hope for mercy. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she understood exactly what her mother had meant. They were not animals. They chose who they became. Kira grabbed the massive warrior under his arms and began dragging him toward the sound of the crying child. The child couldn't have been more than 6 seasons old, huddled against a fallen log as walls of flame closed in from 3 sides. Her dark eyes were wide with terror, and soot streaked her face like war paint. She was small, even for her age, probably one of the tribe's weaker members, someone who would have been abandoned during lean times. Kira reached her just as the log began to catch fire, its dry bark erupting in orange tongues that licked hungrily at the air. Without hesitation, she scooped the child up with one arm while maintaining her grip on the dying leader with the other. The weight was enormous. Her muscles screamed in protest as she half-dragged, half-carried both of them through the maze of smoke and flame. The rival leader was fading fast, his breathing shallow and ragged, but consciousness lingered in his pain-filled eyes. Behind them, the fire roared like some primordial beast claiming its territory. Ahead, she could barely make out the shimmer of water through the haze, their only hope of survival. But between them and salvation, more figures moved through the smoke. Warriors from both tribes, all struggling toward the same goal. She could hear voices calling out, some in her own dialect, others in the harsh consonants of their enemies. The child in her arms whimpered something that might have been mother. Kira felt the small body trembling against her chest, and something inside her own heart cracked. This could have been her own child, if she had lived long enough in this brutal world to bear one. "We're almost there," she whispered, though she doubted the child could understand her words above the chaos. A figure stumbled into their pathbrook, his face a mask of burns and soot. Relief flooded through her at seeing him alive, but his expression remained grim. "The waters claimed," he gasped. "Both tribes. Fighting over it still. Even with the fire ... of course they were. Even facing extinction, they couldn't abandon their territorial instincts. The waterhole that should have been their salvation had become another battlefield." The rival leader in her grip stirred, his voice barely a whisper. "Put me down." "No," Kira replied without thinking. "I'm dying. Save ... the child." She could feel his life ebbing away through her hands, his massive frame becoming dead weight. He was right. She could move faster, save more people, if she abandoned him. But abandoning him would mean becoming exactly what he had been 15 seasons ago. It would mean choosing to be an animal. Through the smoke ahead, she could see the waterhole. Bodies floated on its surface, casualties of the continuing battle between desperate survivors. Warriors still fought along its banks, their weapons slashing through the hazy air as they battled for drinking space. "No one drinks until all drink," Kira roared, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. The fighting didn't stop immediately, but some heads turned toward her voice. They saw her, a soot-covered female carrying a rival child and dragging their fallen leader, emerging from the flames like some smoke-wreathed spirit of the dead. Brock understood first. "She's right," he shouted. "Fire takes us all if we keep fighting." A warrior from the rival tribe, the dead leader's lieutenant, lowered his spear slightly. "Our chief?" Kira knelt beside the water's edge and gently lowered the massive leader to the ground. His breathing was so shallow now that each breath might be his last. "Still alive?" she said simply. "Like your child." She held up the small girl, who looked around at the mixed group of warriors with the confused fear of someone too young to understand tribal hatred. For a moment that stretched like an eternity, the two tribes faced each other across the waterhole. The fire crackled closer, making the decision for all of them. They would share, or they would all burn. The carved tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that stole Kayla's breath and sent her mind reeling with impossible sights. The female Homo habilis stood at the edge of what could only be described as a subterranean paradise, a massive cavern filled with the sound of rushing water and illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering down through hidden openings far above. But it wasn't the water that made her blood run cold. It was what surrounded it. The chamber was a graveyard. Thousands upon thousands of bones lay scattered across terraced stone platforms that had been carved with geometric precision. Skulls arranged in perfect circles. Rib cages stacked like building materials. Long bones sorted by size and type with obsessive attention to detail. All human, all ancient, all bearing the marks of deliberate violence. "Gods," Brock whispered, his pain temporarily forgotten in the face of such overwhelming horror. At the chamber's center, a wide river flowed from one tunnel mouth to another, its waters crystal clear and abundant beyond their wildest dreams. Stone channels had been carved to direct and control the flow, creating pools and reservoirs that could have sustained hundreds of people indefinitely. But the builders of this place had not been interested in sharing. Along the chamber walls, primitive paintings told a story that made the drought-driven violence above seem almost civilized by comparison. Stick figures engaged in ritual slaughter, bodies thrown into the water to appease unnamed entities. And overseeing it all, larger figures with crowns made of bone and expressions of inhuman cruelty. The Bone Kings, the first rulers of the underground realm. Kyla moved deeper into the chamber, her feet splashing through pools of accumulated water as she tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just an ancient shelter. It was a monument to humanity's capacity for evil, a place where the strong had not merely dominated the weak, but had elevated their suffering to the level of religious ritual. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. Heavy boots, many of them. The survivors of the battle above had finally discovered the entrance and were descending into the depths. "Hide," Brock urged, but Kala shook her head. "No more hiding," she said firmly. "No more running." She had made a decision during their descent, one that crystallized as she gazed upon the evidence of ancient atrocities. The cycle had to end. The killing, the hoarding, the endless violence over resources that could sustain everyone if properly managed. It all had to stop. The first figure to emerge from the tunnel was Urk the Crusher, his massive frame silhouetted against the darkness. Behind him came Yara of the Tree Dwellers, followed by Nara the Bonekeeper and the remnants of their respective groups. Perhaps 20 survivors in total, many bearing fresh wounds from the battle above. They stopped as one when they saw the chamber, their eyes widening at the sight of abundant water and ancient death in equal measure. "Enough for everyone," Urk said wonderingly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. But Nara's attention had been captured by something else entirely. She approached one of the bone arrangements with the reverence of a pilgrim visiting a shrine. Her good hand traced the skull formations with obvious admiration. "Beautiful," she breathed. They understood. The weak exist to serve the strong, even in death. She turned to face the other survivors, her blood-stained features alight with terrible inspiration. "Don't you see? This is how it should be. How it always was, before we became soft." Several of the warriors began to nod, their eyes taking on the glassy look of converts to a new religion. The abundance of water had solved one problem, but it had created another. The question of who would rule this underground kingdom. Kala stepped forward before the madness could take hold completely. "Look at them," she said, gesturing to the bone formations. "Really look. These weren't enemies. These weren't rival tribes." She pointed to smaller skeletons mixed in with the larger ones. Children, infants, members of their own people, sacrificed to maintain power. The truth was written in calcium and horror across every surface of the chamber. The Bone Kings had not conquered their enemies. They had consumed their own followers, creating an ever-shrinking circle of survivors until only the rulers remained. And then, inevitably, they had turned on each other. "This is what happens," Kala continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "when we decide that some lives matter more than others. When we choose killing over sharing, domination over cooperation." Nara's laugh was the sound of grinding teeth. "Cooperation? Sharing?" She gestured at the flowing river. "The water doesn't care about your feelings, little mouse. It flows to whoever is strong enough to claim it." But as she spoke, something else caught Kayla's attention. Near the chamber's far wall, partially hidden by shadow and bone piles, stood a series of stone tablets covered with primitive markings. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols arranged in complex patterns. Writing. The first writing she had ever seen. Moving carefully around the edge of the chamber, she approached the tablets while the others argued about territory and leadership. The symbols were crude but unmistakably purposeful, a record left by the chamber's builders. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, the markings began to resolve into recognizable shapes. Pictures of people. Pictures of water. Pictures of... "Warning," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the growing arguments. Everyone turned to look at her as she stood before the ancient tablets, their surface covered with increasingly frantic symbol pictures that told a story of environmental collapse, social breakdown, and ultimately extinction. "They tried to warn us," she continued, her finger tracing the carved symbols. "The Bone Kings. At the end, they understood what they had done. The final tablet was the clearest of all. It showed stick figures throwing weapons into the water, symbols of peace replacing symbols of war, multiple tribes drinking together from the same source. But it was too late for them. The environmental damage had been too severe, the social trust too thoroughly destroyed. The last Bone King had carved his final message alone, surrounded by the bones of everyone he had ever known. "Choose differently," Kala translated, her voice heavy with the weight of ancient tragedy, "or join us in the dark." The chamber fell silent except for the eternal sound of flowing water. Above them, the drought continued to ravage the surface world, driving more tribes toward violence and desperation. But here, in this place of death and abundance, they had been offered a choice. The same choice that had been offered to countless others before them. As the survivors looked from the tablets to the bones to the life-giving river, each made their decision about what kind of ancestors they wanted to be. And in the flowing water, their reflections showed not just who they were, but who they might yet become. The war for water would continue on the surface world, but in the depths, something new was being born. Something that the ancient Bone Kings had glimpsed too late, the radical idea that survival was not a competition, but a collaboration. Whether it would be enough to break the cycle of violence that had destroyed so many before them,